Most people obey. They bow their heads. They follow the rules. They swallow poison. And in return, they get the illusion of safety. But once in a while, someone refuses. Someone laughs at the rules, spits on illusions, mocks the thrones. Someone chooses exile over obedience. That's what the rebel philosophers did. Socrates chose death over kneeling to lies. Diogenes chose a burial over kneeling to illusions, and every Catharsian since has carried the same fire, because obedience is poison, exile is freedom, and the highest act of power is to walk away. If you've ever refused to kneel, even when it cost you everything, you are not broken. You are a Catharsian. Claim your path. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon. Find the link in the description box. Society tells you obedience is safety. Follow the rules. Respect tradition. Do as you're told. But obedience is chains. Obedience is silence. Obedience is poison. Because obedience kills your fire. It suffocates your rage. It erases your soul. That's why you've always hated it. That's why you've always felt suffocated in schools, in jobs, in families. Because your soul cannot drink poison. And that's why the rebel philosophers refused. Exile looks like punishment, loneliness, rejection, alienation. But exile is proof. Proof that you chose fire over silence. Proof that you chose truth over comfort. Proof that you chose freedom over obedience. That's why Diogenes walked away from society and lived in a barrel. That's why Socrates refused to beg for mercy at his trial. That's why you've always known exile hurts, but obedience kills. Inside Diogenes' barrel, exile becomes your crown. If you've carried loneliness long enough, it's time to turn it into freedom. Enter Diogenes' barrel on Patreon now. The world can tolerate mediocrity. It can tolerate lies. It can tolerate obedience. But it cannot tolerate rebellion. Because rebellion is contagious. Rebellion spreads. Rebellion exposes the illusion. That's why they mocked Diogenes. That's why they killed Socrates. That's why they've punished you. Every exile you've endured, every punishment you've suffered, every silence forced on you, those weren't accidents. They were the system's desperate attempt to stop your fire from spreading. You've always felt different, alien, out of place, and you wondered why. Why can't I just belong? Why can't I just obey? Why can't I just play along like everyone else? Because you are not like them. You are not a placeholder. You are not designed to do that. You are pure fire. You're catharsis. And that fire will never fit into their illusions. That's why you've always felt like an exile, even before they exiled you. If you've carried alienation your whole life, that's initiation. Begin your path now. Join the Pythagorean path on Patreon from the link in the description box. Every Carthaginian faces the same choice: exile or obedience. The crowd chooses obedience. They kneel, they drink poison, they live quietly and die forgotten. But you can't. You never could. Your soul refuses it. And that refusal has made your life heavier. It has cost you friends, family, belonging. But it has also proven your destiny. Because you choose exile over obedience over and over again. You choose fire, and fire never dies. If you know exile is your proof and not your curse, then you are already a Catharsian. Join the Catharsians on Patreon now. Find the link in the description box. Society doesn't fear criminals, it knows how to control them. It doesn't fear the violent, it knows how to cage them. What it fears is the rebel who refuses to kneel. Diogenes, philosophers like him. You are Diogenes. You've always been like him because you cannot be bought. You can't be silenced. You can't be owned. That's why they mocked Diogenes, humiliated him, called him insane. That's why they killed Socrates, condemned him for corrupting the youth. That's why you've been punished your whole life. Because rebellion is the one thing the system cannot survive. If you've been hated, not for what you did, but for who you are, then you already carry the mark of the rebel philosopher. You are a Catharsian. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon from the link in the description. Every punishment you've endured has been proof you're chosen. When teachers silenced you for questioning, it was proof. When bosses punished you for rejecting lies, it was proof. When family members shamed you for refusing traditions, it was proof. Because mediocrity is never punished. Placeholders are never punished, they are rewarded. Only fire is punished, and that's exactly what you are. Exile burns, it isolates, it suffocates. You felt it. You felt it in loneliness, in silence, in rejection, all your life. And sometimes you've hated yourself for it. You've wondered, why me? Why is my path heavier? Why do I always end up alone? Because exile is the mark of the chosen. Exile is proof you refused poison. Exile is the crown of those who were never meant to kneel. Inside Diogenes' barrel, exile is not shame, it's coronation. If you've carried loneliness long enough, it's time to wear it as a crown. Enter Diogenes' barrel now from the description. Rebellion is not calm, it's fire. Socrates burned with questions, Diogenes burned with contempt, and you've burned with rage. That rage is sacred. It's not madness, it's not arrogance, it is your proof. Proof that your soul refuses chains, proof that your fire rejects illusions, proof that your destiny is greater than obedience. Most people smother the rage to survive. You never could. And that's why you've suffered more, because your fire cannot die. The system doesn't need you to be wrong, it only needs you to be guilty. Because guilt justifies punishment, and punishment keeps others obedient. That's why Socrates was called guilty of corrupting the youth. That's why Diogenes was called guilty of madness. That's why you've been called guilty of arrogance, rebellion, danger. It was never true. Guilt keeps the illusion alive. And that's your sentence by society. Guilty. Guilty for being authentic, guilty for being yourself, guilty for being real. And if you've been carrying that guilt like a curse, it's time to recognize it for what it really is, proof of your fire. If you've been condemned for refusing to kneel, it's because you were never meant to. Begin your discipline inside the Pythagorean path. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon. Socrates drank poison once and died. Diogenes endured exile his whole life. And you? You've carried punishment after punishment, exile after exile, silence after silence, and still you live. That survival is proof. Proof that the poison didn't kill you. Proof that the exile didn't break you. Proof that the punishment didn't silence you. You're still here. And that makes you more dangerous than any king. You've carried exile like a wand, but it's not a wound, it's not trauma, it's your crown. Because only outsiders are punished, only fire is condemned, only rebels are exiled. Every scar on your life is proof of your freedom. Every punishment you endured is proof of your destiny. Every exile you survived is proof that you are the rebel philosopher. You are Diogenes. And that crown is burning on your head already. If you're ready to stop hiding your crown and start wearing it proudly and openly, step into the Aurelius Council. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon from the link in the description. Obedience looks safe. It looks respectable. It looks rewarded. But it always ends in death. Because those who obey trade their life for silence. They trade their rage for chains. They trade their destiny for poison. They die long before their bodies collapse. They live as placeholders, forgotten, faceless, meaningless. That's why you've always hated obedience. You could feel the death in it. You could smell the poison. You could taste the chains. And that hatred wasn't arrogance, it was pure clarity. If obedience has always disgusted you, it's because you were never meant to drink poison. You are a Catharsian leader. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon from the link in the description box. Exile might look like failure to others, but it outlives thrones. Socrates' questions still burn thousands of years after his death. Diogenes' burial is remembered long after Alexander's empire fell. And your fire will outlast the ones who mocked you, silenced you, punished you. No one will remember them. No one does. But everyone will remember you. Because exile is not weakness, it is immortality. Truth does not rot, rage does not die. That's why your suffering has been heavier, because your fire carries weight that will echo beyond this age. Society will never forgive you, not because you harmed it, but because you humiliated it, not because you lied, but because you told truth, not because you were wrong, but because you refused to kneel. That's why they've mocked you. That's why they've excluded you. That's why they've punished you. Your refusal is unforgivable. Your exile is undeniable. Your fire cannot be erased. If you've been waiting for forgiveness, stop. You were never meant to be forgiven. You were meant to be crowned. Inside Diogenes' barrel, exile becomes fire. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon. Find the link in the description. Rage is not meant to be buried, it's meant to be crowned. Socrates' questions became Plato's philosophy. Diogenes' mockery became the weapon of outsiders for centuries. And your rage will become leadership if you choose it. Because rebellion is not just about saying no, it's about showing others they can say no too. Every time you refuse change, you light a fire in those who see you. Every time you reject illusions, you remind them they can reject too. Every time you laugh at fake power, you lead. If you know your fire was meant to awaken others, then you are ready for leadership. Step into the Aurelius Council. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon from the link in the description box. Empires rise and fall. Crowns glitter and then rot. Thrones tower and then crumble. But rebels, philosophers, outsiders, Catharsians, they live forever. Because truth cannot die, fire cannot be silenced, exile cannot be erased. That's why Socrates and Diogenes burn brighter in history than kings who ruled the world. That's why your fire will burn longer than those who mocked you, because rebels outlive empires, and exile outlives obedience. You stand before the same choice as every rebel philosopher: exile or obedience. Obedience means poison, chains, silence, death. Exile means rage, fire, freedom, immortality. The crowd will always kneel. The placeholders will always obey. The system will always demand silence. But you will laugh, you will reject, you will burn, because you are the rebel philosopher, you are Catharsian, you were never meant to obey. Socrates chose death over obedience. Diogenes chose exile over obedience. And you must choose fire, freedom over obedience. This is the Carthaginian spirit. This is your destiny. Three paths stand open. The Pythagorean path, where rage becomes discipline and fire is sharpened into clarity. Diogenes' burial, where exile becomes coronation and loneliness is transformed into freedom. The Aurelius Council, where rebels rise as leaders and exile becomes a throne of fire. You don't need their forgiveness. You don't need their crowns. You don't need their poison. You only need fire, and you already have it. Join the Catharsians today. Be the rebel philosopher who chose exile over obedience and wear your crown of fire.